In those rare instances when we do talk about Guantanamo, it's about the politics of it. There's very little said these days about who the prisoners are, how they got there, and who's guilty of what. In October of 2001, 6 Algerian men in Bosnia were arrested, all suspected of plotting to blow up the U.S. embassy in Sarajevo. But after a 3-month investigation, Bosnian investigators found insufficient evidence to justify their arrest, so the Bosnian Supreme Court ordered their immediate release. Here's what happened next, as reported by NBC Nightly News that night.
Police vans carried the 6 Algerian suspects away from the prison in Sarajevo, right into the hands of U.S. military forces, who immediately took them into custody. Angry mobs of Muslims who claim the U.S. is waging war against Islam and not terrorism tried to block the handoff of the Muslim prisoners, but were beaten back by riot police. The 6 suspects are accused of attempting to blow up the U.S. embassy in Sarajevo.
Just so we're clear, they were released by the courts and then taken by the U.S. government. They would become some of the first detainees at Guantanamo Bay. One of those prisoners was a relief worker named Lakhdar Boumediene, who you are seeing in this picture. Eventually, the U.S. government stopped accusing the men of trying to blow up the U.S. embassy, but Lakhdar was held at Guantanamo for 7 years without charge or explanation. He's a free man today, in part because of a Supreme Court decision that bears his name that ruled that terror suspects held at Guantanamo have a constitutional right to challenge their detention in federal court. Yesterday, with the help of an Arabic translator, I interviewed Lakhdar Boumediene via satellite from his home in Nice, France. And it was, I have to say, one of the hardest interviews I've ever done as a journalist and one of the most effective. Here are some of our discussion. Take a look.
Arrived to Guantanamo and they removed the black bag from my head and the muffs and from my ear and blindfolds. You know, it was a big shock to me. And I said to myself, is this America that respects human rights? During the preliminary interrogations, I thought that America was a great country and that there is justice and freedom and human rights, and that they were realized within a day or two that, or maybe a month, that they will realize that I am innocent and they will let me go home to my family. But it was totally the contrary. This is something that I would never forget. They were interrogating me for hours and hours during nights from midnight till 6 a.m. The situation changed in 2004, and I got a major interrogator. I don't really remember his real name. And I used to call him the elephant, and he said, your case is not a case of the U.S. Embassy, it's not a case of terrorism, and it's not a case of armed group. No, your case is, it's a political case, it's a purely political, If our Bush makes an agreement with your President Bouteflika in Algeria, we can probably reach an agreement. Here I receive an orders, and I have to follow these orders, and I have to ask you these questions, whether you respond to my questions or you refuse to respond to my questions. I don't care. My job is to ask you questions, but you have nothing to do with terrorism. Your case is a purely political case.
At a certain point, you decided to go on a hunger strike to protest your detention there. What happened when you decided to go on a hunger strike?
They brought me like a special meal, like it was like some potatoes and carrots, and they covered with some sauce to remove the bad odor. And then they said, you have 15 days to eat this. You're gonna eat this kind of food because you provoked a problem with the soldier. It's gonna be your food for lunch and for dinner. And I said, thank you very much for the meal, and I'm not going to eat it until, God willing, I am going to be moved from here.
In America, the word torture has a very specific meaning. It's very important we understand, when you say you were tortured after Obama came in, what specifically was done to you?
Specifically, when I was on a hunger strike, and here I can explain to you, and then you you will tell me whether it's torture or not. Americans should decide whether it's torture or not. From the very first day, for 2.5 years, they knew that my left sinus was blocked. That was before I came to jail. I was taken to jail, so the tube could not get inside. So the feeding was on the right side only. They knew that. And this is what was registered for the nurses and the physicians with regard to the feeding. But when the nurse comes, they try for 5 to 10 minutes on this side of the nose, and then they hit the bone. And I mean, you tell me, was this torture or not? The real face of America is Guantanamo. That's the real face of America, is Guantanamo. No justice, outlaw. There is no human rights. Suffering. People are suffering, torturing. There are so many reasons, and we're not going to list them in this program. But this is the real face of America.
Would it make a difference to you if the government accepted, if they admitted they made a mistake and formally apologized?
Well, of course, things will change. Many things will change. The first thing is that I will get my rights here, so I can start a new life. And now I don't have anything. I lost all my life. How can I start from scratch? How can I start now? When I go and try to find a job, and I give them my CV. I don't know how you call it, a CV or something. And they ask me, between 2002 and 2009, what did you do? And this is where the shock is. When the interviewer hears the word Guantanamo in parentheses, or prison or detention facility, they freak out and they say, okay, we will get in touch with you. And, but they never do. No, they don't even call you. Forget it, because you're not going to hear anything from them. Want to address this question to Americans, to the American people. I am asking you, if one of you is imprisoned in America for 7.5 years, he was deprived of his wife, his children, and his life was destroyed. He lost his job, and his kids cannot say in front of their peers, our father was in prison. And when guy is released from jail after 7 years, is he compensated? I leave the American people to answer this question. I leave it to them. American government, is an arrogant government. Until this very moment, they don't want to admit that they made a mistake towards Boumediene Lakhdar. This is the least they could have done. The American government could have done is to admit guilt here, to admit that they made a mistake.